annotate all over the slide while
I'm hungry now. I want some sushi.
I know. Oh my goodness. Yeah. First world problems, privilege problems, but sushi has been harder to get over the last couple of years. Okay. While you're annotating the slide, and don't worry, we actually have like an answers slide. So even if it gets all madness, we will be able to resolve your curiosity if you need it resolved before we move on. But one thing, there are several things that we want to say. First of all,
and you said we were going to be off to
I
just
know,
get right started.
I know. It's really important. Our university hasn't said anything publicly, and so I feel it necessary to acknowledge the fact that Nazis on Parliament Hill, not acceptable.
Nope.
And our government and our leaders need to actually say that. Okay. Moving on. The other thing that we would like to say is that we completely, and Dr. Ward Campbell, recognize that this semester is not an easy semester. Today, probably in particular, for some of you, I think most of you are now on campus. You will not have to be on campus for 1070, and you probably do have to be on campus for your other courses, and we recognize that that is particularly stressful from a mental health perspective, and also probably from a physical health perspective, things are going to get challenging, and it's going to be hard for you to consolidate or integrate your learning if you are experiencing illness. And in a very large course like what we have here, it is it's not hard. So if anybody says that it's hard, then push back. It is not hard to come up with ways of supporting students. It just requires a little bit of, I don't know, creativity
and empathy.
And empathy. So we are making a unilateral decision in order to help you. We hope that it's helpful.
With our one brain.
With our one brain. The topic tests, the 3 of them. You're experiencing some anxiety about those. We appreciate that. So for this semester, we are going to drop the lowest grade of the topic tests. Just like we're doing with the assignments, just like we're doing with the quizzes, we will also do the same thing for the topic tests. We strongly encourage you to plan to write them all.
Do that.
Do it, because once you get to know how we write questions, there's an advantage there for sure for the next test. But if you get sick and you cannot write one of them, then that is a free drop. That is meant for that purpose. Okay, so you have to write to us and ask. If you've missed one, you've missed one, and we will be dropping that lowest grade. That just makes sure that we can get emails from you and respond to everyone right away, but we're anticipating that there will be more emails as you are now on campus, and so we want to do our best to help as much as possible. And we'll continue to monitor the situation and check in with you if that's okay. Okay, so I think you've got 9 different things. 1, 2. It's hard to tell though. It's hard to tell. Okay, and some of you are changing the things, which I think is pretty funny. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear all of that so that we can show you the answer key. There we go. There you go. Okay, go ahead and see if you got all of them. I'm looking at some of them and going, that's not different. What's different about it? But I think you managed to find all of them anyway. Okay.
So 2 things to add, one to add on and then one to extend. Friends in Germany were retweeting a German saying that if there is one Nazi at a table with 10 people listening, you've counted wrong. There's 11 Nazis at the table.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that a lot this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And the other is that there was a question in the chat: is the lecture going to be on this week? Is this lecture going to be on this week's test? And the answer is
yes.
Yes.
Yes. This is, again, our lectures are all about practicing, right, and learning together and thinking about things. And so this is effectively studying. We did launch the asynchronous study tool, so it is in the announcements section with all of the information that you need in order to get going. What else? Let's get going because we've got lots of stuff to go through today. This is kind of tree thinking 2.0, so we're kind of diving in now that we got the fundamentals done from last time. We're going to kind of dive in even more and show you what cool things you can learn.
We're going to fly through this.
Super fast.
No.
Oh.
It was a pun. You'll see it'll unpack itself later.
We will not fly.
You were unflighted.
I am unflighted. Okay.
But that happens.
Wow. Okay, but first, we give you a homework
Rewind
question.
later on. It'll be funny. And I'll come back and explain it in the chat.
Homework question. Let's do that really quickly. Okay, so let me just launch the poll for you. It is question number 7. There we go. And go. Please don't annotate on the slide. Get everyone just to click in. If you need to write on the slide, write in the margins.
There's DWR. Somebody's dog just jumped on their laptop.
Oh.
This is not a fractal event. If it's Dougie, there's an effect. If it's Lily, we should have had that going during Caribou.
What's that? Oh, the lure? Do you think it's in time? Yeah. Okay.
And I never look back.
Shh, they're working.
I'm a muscle with a lure. I'm a muscle with a lure today.
Oh, we
I am funny. So funny. Oh, speaking of dogs.
Which one is that? The little one. Okay, just a few more seconds. Lots of you already clicking in. I see that.
Ooh, look at that distribution.
The distribution will be great motivation for studying and kind of diving into the applied. Yeah.
Always check the depth before you dive into the applied.
Yeah. Okay. What's wrong?
Did you eat?
Oh, she's. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay, just a few more seconds because like almost 90% of you have already clicked in, and I'm sure you're chomping at the bit to know the correct answer. Well done. Okay. So, lots of you writing for study tips, and here's another one. So each of these statements through a multiple choice are either true or false, right? And so what we're looking for here is the one that is not supported by these data. So the data are the images or the simplicity of one lure versus the complexity of another. And what you're looking for is the statement that does not support what these data are, what the observation is, right? So we're looking for the false statement. And always remember, though, the way that we write questions, it is always linked to a piece of data or some kind of narrative or some kind of story. And so that's really what we want you to stay sort of within the world of. We give you all of the data or all of the information that you need in order to evaluate these statements. So you can see the distribution. There's a little bit of there's not a lot of consensus, although the 33% that did choose E did choose the correct answer in this case. And so knowing that is the false statement, why don't you go ahead, even if you got it right, go ahead and write out the reasons for why that is a false statement and write it as a true statement. And then for A, B, C, and D, write out rationale, like which parts of evolution that we've been working on, what concepts come into play here, because these are kind of the applied statements of those concepts. And all of that should be super relevant to helping you with the asynchronous study tool that we have, as well as just generally preparing for the topic test that's coming. Okay.
We're doing so well.
We are?
Oh, yeah.
You and me.
Yeah.
And we're good at evolution.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But we're doing really well.
Okay.
Look at this. It's not 20 past.
Oh, we're on time, you mean? Yeah. Okay, and when I say we're good at evolution, the reason why is because if you take a look at like data and learning, like data about learning, the people that learn the most are the people that have to teach it. And so if you have an opportunity to teach it, like to your big brother, big sister, big sibling, little sibling, whatever it is that you've got at home.
Somebody on the bus.
You will not be popular, but also really good way of learning. Okay, so we took a look at this, a similar phylogeny the other day, and what I wanted to do for just a minute is to show you what the original phylogeny looked like, and it looked like this, which is slightly different than what we had from the previous class. And we intentionally changed it because there are a couple of things that can be misleading in the presentation of a phylogeny like this. The first one is that humans are men. And
thankfully, that is not.
There is a degree of variation, both in gender as well as sex, that needs to be acknowledged in the representations of humans that often is not, especially within these sort of like old school disciplines like evolution. So we changed it, but this is what the original did look like. The other thing that can be misleading in this type of phylogeny, right, this like triangular type of phylogeny, is the suggestion that there's this main line of evolution, right? And if you're at the end of the main line, then you are the epitome of evolution. And this is like a really sort of egocentric, human-centric kind of way of talking about evolution, is to kind of put humans right there, and then everything that branches off is kind of like the missed opportunity for perfection, right? And this isn't the case. And what we want to do is connect you with the slide from last class that demonstrates that this is not the case.
Before you click it. So we've been trying to plant the seed for this already, and this is us revisiting the seed. One of the plantings is that nodes rotate, right? So we can change this narrative without changing the tree. However, visually, one of the missteps that people make is going down this road.
Yes, like a lot, right? Remember, we can change the position of the chimpanzee and the human, and it says exactly the same thing, right? We can put the gorilla at the end, and then the human would be where the gorilla is, and the chimpanzee would be in the middle. Same information, just by rotating those nodes. But we don't when we demonstrate or when we draw these things, right?
And sometimes, even if we do in a class like this, that's not really the point, because if ever a phylogeny like this were to be printed in a newspaper, this is what it'll look like. And so everyone who isn't us, with the privilege of being here and sharing this kind of time and thought together, we as a society often end up enforcing this thought. So we're taking the time to stick this like burdock into your brain to be like, no, wrong. No.
Okay. Now, one of the connection, the evidence that there is no main line of evolution and we are not the epitome of evolution, is this phylogeny, and so we use the baby as a representation of humans, right? And that's what we had copied and pasted over top of the phylogeny that you saw previously when we showed it in the last class. Is this one? It's time. We have all been evolving for the same amount of time. Our lineages have, but we as species are very different ages. Okay. And there's not much information here that you can glean on how old the fish species is relative to the human species. That would require some more detail of the specific, like human clade versus the fish clades and all of those things. But the important thing to note is that our lineages have all been evolving. So we are as evolved as bacteria because bacteria exist, because they are extant, right? They may be simpler, they may be less complex structurally, or physiologically, right? But we are as evolved. Now, the human species, they are
bacteria. They are as evolved.
They are as evolved as things. Yeah, that's even better. Now, what is different is the age of our species, and human is a very new species.
We're a baby
compared to some of these other ones. So we don't know, obviously, when exactly the first human was. I mean, that's like
It was a Wednesday.
It was a Wednesday. It was a Wednesday about 195,000 years ago, right? Like it was not that long ago, right? And so, tying this to understanding of our history and of our place within the world, I think one of the best ways to kind of help understand the difference between a new species and an evolving lineage is by going to that book that we have recommended in the course outline. So we have a book, it's recommended reading, but it is fantastic
really good
reading. So I'm just, and I am not a scholar in Indigenous knowledge or anything, and so I'm going to read the words of a scholar in Indigenous knowledge because I think it connects really well. And also it pushes back a little bit on the idea that, other ways of knowing don't touch on evolution like it's some kind of like sacred science thing. It is totally not. But anyway, let me read if you don't mind because I think it's cool. Okay, it says, in the Western tradition, there is a recognized hierarchy of beings with, of course, the human being on top, the pinnacle of evolution, the darling of creation, and the plants at the bottom. So this is a little bit different from what we were saying before, but it's pretty close. But in native ways of knowing, human people are often referred to as the younger brother of creation. They say that humans have the least experience with how to live and thus the most to learn. I love that. We must look to our teachers among the other species for guidance. So what this is saying, if we kind of bring it into the idea of lineages having evolved for the same amount of time, is indeed we are all descendant from the same common ancestor, yet we exist in our current form or in our current species as a much younger species compared to like a whole whack of the ones that are here. And what I understand the author to say is that we can learn a lot from them, right? Which is really important. We can learn about, well, you'll see in ecology, right? We're going to kind of dive into this, but in terms of how we relate to each other, we have a lot to learn.
I think one of the things that makes me immediately think of is when I think of, and it's going to come, like you said, in ecology, but even in evolution.
Yeah.
When we work, part of the work that we do in our lab, for example, is to describe species. Mm. We don't discover them. Right. The species are fine. In fact, they're more than fine without us knowing anything about them. Yeah. We describe them, yep. Which is a process of having them tell us what is what and who they are. Yeah. And if you think of the species description that way, then the world makes a whole bunch more sense.
That's right. And my research is actually, a lot of it is in biomimicry or nature-inspired solutions. And so this whole idea about learning from nature is super important. And super rich. Like there's a lot that's sort of helpful. But anyway, important to note, I hope.
We're almost out of the new slides we put in this morning.
Yeah. No, that's not true.
That's not true.
Okay. So, when did an adaptation evolve in the lineage? So this is how we get closer and closer to speciation events and things like this, right? These adaptations that bring us further, differentiate us further and further from each other, right? Okay.
And I love that way of thinking about things because it really makes tree-based thinking less esoteric, less ivory tower, and more applied. Because phylogenetically analyzing traits or analyzing traits in light of a phylogeny, plotting them onto a phylogeny,
yes,
is super useful. And by doing that, we can understand trait evolution. We can understand whether traits have evolved because of shared ancestry. We can understand whether traits have evolved because of a strict environmental condition. So homologously or homoplasiusly.
There we go. These are more terms to kind of throw at you and incorporate into the way that you kind of organize your thoughts about evolution.
And this last, the gaining and the losing,
yeah,
is amazing because it really makes those who think about a progression, and you called it a main line, this flies in the, I did it again, flies in the face of that.
Yeah.
That's going to keep coming.
They're going to groan as soon as we get to that part
Yep.
that you're referring to.
Wow.
But here we go. So, okay, so we can map on the evolution of adaptations in order to organize our thoughts a little bit. And it's kind of like, this is where it gets super fuzzy. This is kind of where I think the creativity comes into the science of evolution. Because it's really difficult to kind of time out when each of these things happened. And so you're trying to find the most what's called parsimonious tree or explanation that kind of like allows for the idea of homologous trait evolution, but also recognizing the fact that you can have these like convergent evolution stories, right? These homoplasious traits. But this is, a fairly accepted. Have there been any updates to this, or is this like pretty? This is pretty.
All this works for what it's showing.
It all works, right, for the most part. So dinosaurs and birds love that they're together. But just taking a look at sort of the big innovations that have evolved and differentiated these clades. You can see vertebrae, bony skeleton, four limbs, amniotic, and maybe they become a little less familiar as we get closer to the tips, right? These things that sort of describe or characterize individual clades as they get smaller and smaller. And how do we apply that to mussels? So what we want to do is we want to kind of just allow your brain to be in that uncertain, confused state. We're going to do it together. It's going to be fine. And if you do feel confused or uncertain, that's kind of what we're going for. And we want you to just try, just like even without even thinking about whether that's the right answer, just try it and see where you go, okay? So there are several species of mussels in freshwater systems. You know that, right? We wanted kind of...
They've watched the video of the limnology or the fourth year students using their limnology expertise.
Okay. What we want to do is we want to simplify this because this is complex. All of these different species here that are in different clumps, this is like way too beyond us for the moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some piles of different species of mussels, a little simpler, focusing on two traits, okay? What we want you to do is to actually try, like, in the margins here, if you have to, on a pen on a piece of paper with a pen or on a separate screen or whatever, try to build a phylogeny that resolves all of the different species that we're going to show you, okay? And it's more important, again, to focus on what you're doing and why you're making those decisions rather than the right answer, because there are multiple right answers, okay? So we want you to just kind of reflect on it for a second. So we've got 6 species of mussels, and here we just show you the little clumps, right? Those are 3 individuals of each species. They're different by shell shape as well as by shell color, okay? Just see if you can come up with a tree by organizing them. We'll give you a very short amount of time, but really do try, okay? So go ahead.
I think I can see on that list of attendance that somebody's attending on data on their phone.
Oh. You're amazing.
Yeah, well done you.
Thank you. Okay. Is that enough time? No. It's like super confusing, right? It's not enough time.
But I think we
need to kind of move on a little bit. Okay. So, just a quick question. One of the decisions that we have to make when we build a tree is to decide sort of which trait we're going to start with, like how we're going to group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Like how are we going to combine species into similarities? And we have 2 variables here, or 2 traits here, so it's kind of like one or the other, right? So if you started with color grouping, so if you grouped 1 and 6 and 4 and 2 and 5 and 3 together, can you please put a stamp on the left-hand side of the margin, or like of the slide in the margin? Just go ahead and like.
Where is it? It's over here.
Yeah.
This side.
It's over on this side. Yeah. Okay. And if you started with shell shape instead, so you grouped 1 and 5, and 2 and 6. Yeah, there we go. There we go. You totally got me. Okay. Super. So there is no a priori reason for starting from one and the other based on the data that we've presented, right? There's no like, oh, I should have started, but you can see that there's a bit of a difference, right? So like most of you,
what?
Shape.
And secondarily.
And secondarily color, right? Cool.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter, but what's really key is to understand the consequences of your decision. So if you chose shell shape, so you started by grouping 1 and 5 together, and then 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. What does that imply about color? And put it in the chat, or you can write on the screen. This is like the big, true or false statement. If it's this, then this is implied. Kind of. What does it imply about the second variable that you picked?
There's some thoughts that all rhyme with convergently.
Convergent.
Yeah.
Super good. Good. Yes. Super good. Okay. So whichever one you started with, basically what you're implying is that tree is less likely to change. That one is more conserved within the tree than the other one. So if you grouped the green ones together, the red ones together, and the blue ones together, if you did color first, that implies that shell shape is more easily changed and changes convergently across the tree. And then the inverse would be true if you started with the other one. And both of those, with this information that we've given you, totally fine. Okay? Here we go. Let's keep on. Now, of course, mussels are not just 2 traits. There's nothing that just has 2 traits. And it becomes even more complex, just simply by adding a lure.
The simplest, maybe the simplest metazoan multicellular animal is called a placozoan. It has 6 cell types. That's it. So
we're not there yet.
Yeah, we're only at 3 right
We're
now.
only at 3. Here's a lure difference, right? We go from the simple lures of number 2 to the rather complex lures of number 3, right? But all of them, not all of them, sorry, number 6, number 5, number 1, and number 3 all have large lures. Some of them more complex, but all of them large, whereas 2 and 4 different shell types have simple lures. So now which trait do you
So what
begin
traits?
with?
So we've got lure type,
Yeah.
shell color,
Yeah.
shell shape.
Yeah. What do you start with?
Yeah. There's ideas about which is going to be more complex. How would it be harder
Yep.
to have changes in one trait or another?
Yep.
Those are good things to be
Those
thinking
are really
about.
good thoughts, right? Yeah. So it's more about not what happened, but what's probable, what's likely, and this is where you get into the thing that annoys students of biology the most. It annoys me the most, right? It's like there is not necessarily a definitive answer, and the answer may not ever be knowable, okay? So we have to talk about it in terms of likelihood and probability. And let's add an external trait. Like this is, obviously this is going to be a bit beyond our scope, but like it's not just like traits that you have on your body, but it can also be ecological traits or relationships that you have with other species or other abiotic things, right? These are all traits. So the fish hosts then, especially if the lure yields different responses from different types of fish, is also a trait that you can put on a tree that complicates things, right? So just kind of keep that in mind, because all of the work that's been done on phylogenies up until a decade or 2 ago, you'll give me the actual date, has been done by looking at these traits through human eyes, through human abilities to sense things. And we've totally gotten it wrong a whole bunch of times. Wrong.
No, I mean, and that's kind of the
Unlikely.
important part, because remember, a phylogeny is a hypothesis that's based on evidence, the best evidence that you have at the time. And so it would be a process, instead of kind of, you could think of this is a process of we studied more things. We learned more about these taxa, these mussels. So initially we only knew about shell shape and color. And we looked at them a little bit more, and maybe at a different river, a different time of year, and we learned about their lures. And now we learn about a little bit more, and we learn about their associations. And so one of the questions in the chat is very simply, could you take all of these into consideration? And so ideally, yes. Yeah. And so we start thinking about, we call them in biology, we would call them a trait matrix, which is a table, basically, with your columns being shell shape, lure, fish host association, and color, shell color. So you've got 4 columns, and then you've got however many taxa, or species, if you want to call them that in this case, down. And then you would code in the matrix who has this. 0s if you don't have it, 1 if you do.
Yeah. There's a trait matrix coming up in the future.
There exactly is. And it's tasty.
So all of this is to kind of introduce you to the kind of like, whoa, okay. And over the last couple of decades, we're starting to use different tools for making phylogenetic trees. And I happen to be sitting next to like one of the world experts in this. So what?
Oh, sorry. He's over there. It's Lily.
Yeah. So what tools are you using?
For what?
For making phylogenies.
Computers. In fact, I have to depend that to purchasing. Every once in a while, purchasing will say, Smith, why did you buy a computer? And I'm like, to do science.
Okay, what exactly are you analyzing in order to make your trees?
Well, we could use traits, and we often do use morphological traits, behavioral traits, acoustic traits, ecological traits.
Odor traits?
Odor traits, yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
So chemosensory traits.
Okay, get to the good part.
But also DNA. And so we would use DNA, and that could be of sequences, so like genetic DNA, or DNA of the whole organism, so genomic DNA. And one of the cool things about all of this is that you exist as biologists in an era when computing power makes doing all sorts of these things very possible. Because I don't think we show them the calculation of how many possible trees associated with how many possible taxa or traits. It increases like to numbers that I don't know the names of. Like bigger than, like it's Avogadro's of Avogadro's numbers versus like number of possible trees. And so the computing power has been for a long time a limitation of figuring this kind of thing out.
Yep. So how many new species did you describe in your most recent paper?
403.
There you go. When previously, decades ago, it was like one paper, one species. You do it one at a time.
And there is, if you want to know the social network of scientists as people, so not, so the sociology of doing science is that some people have a big, ugly, dark hate on for the fact that we have proposed increasing the rapidity with which you do this.
You should read some of the stuff they write about Smith. Nasty. It's great because it's well, it's not great. They're wrong, but it is fun to kind of see outpouring of emotion and enthusiasm for your work, and there really is a kind of like, you know, tolerable edge that you can't cross, and Smith crosses it a lot. Okay, so let's imagine that this is the tree. Okay, so we've done the DNA. We know that this is the tree. This is the correct.
And we've made the trait matrix of morphological.
That's right. Yeah. So we've resolved the tree, right? And you wouldn't be expected to go from this to this. Don't worry. Okay. But let's imagine that this is it. Okay. Okay. So from here, we can make all sorts of inferences about the evolution of different traits, knowing that we don't always know exactly, definitively what the history is, okay? But we can make inferences, especially as we get closer to the tips. Things become more likely, right? So let's play around a little bit with that. So here are some statements, and we We want you to evaluate whether these statements are supported by the tree. Let me just launch here. And again, please don't annotate on the slide. Let's go directly to the polling question. I always have to read these. Which statement is supported by the evolutionary tree?
Rhubarb, 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 rhubarb. Rhubarb.
78% have participated. We'll just give you another couple seconds. Okay, wonderful.
You're beautiful. What did he tweet the other day?
Oh, I forgot. That was really funny though. Okay, very, very close to 90%. We'll just give you 10 seconds if you want to participate. It's not changing. Okay. Oh, there we go. Couple more in. Yay! Okay, I'm going to stop it now. And then I will share the results. So the correct answer is C. So shell shape has changed at least 3 times. And go ahead and see if you can find the evidence of that. One of the sort of the ways of walking through how many of the least times something has changed. Remember, we can never know the maximum number of times unless we know about the common ancestors as well as all of the ancestors that are represented within the branches, right? So we can definitely figure out what the fewest number of changes is by simply taking the trait and applying it to Z and going, okay, Z was a short, squat shell shape, or Z was a tall, thin shell shape. How many times has it changed at least? You can do it that way. You can take a look at how the clades diverge, that kind of deal, to be able to count the number of times. And I think you're already doing that for me already on the slide, so thank you. That's super helpful. Okay, Kiara wants to know about ancestor X could not have been blue. Ancestor X could have been blue, and if ancestor X was blue, what does that imply about the color green? That it evolved how? So if
there was a mutation convergently, or 2 hypotheses.
Yeah, ancestor X could also have been yellow. Yeah, ancestor X could have been any color. It's probably more probable that ancestor X was green, but it could have been another color, and so could not have been blue is impossible to tell from these data, right? If it was blue, then it just means that green evolved convergently, or that it's homoplazious, okay? So there are sort of probabilities, but definite things, especially as we move within here, any kind of definite statements to me are suspect because it's really hard to tell unless we know more about what those common ancestors look like.
A couple of questions about B.
B.
We tell why B is wrong. Why was B not?
It's very likely that Y lost a complex lure. So it's possible, but it's not very likely, especially because we see that the two extant species, and then Y is the closest common ancestor, like the most recent common ancestor. So, likely, very likely, no, it's possible, but it's not very likely. It's more likely that it was a simple lure and that the complex lure evolved at least at W, or maybe even convergently at the other ones. Okay. So again, just be careful with these types of statements. Okay. People want more. Okay. Ancestor W was very likely had a small lure. Again, same thing as applied to the very likely from B. It's also really just not possible to say what's very likely. Okay, are we good? Are we good? Moving on? Okay, cool. Because what we want to do is, here, some study stuff you can do to study, to prepare. Hopefully they will be helpful. The feedback is pretty good. Although no one writes to me and goes, Dr. Jacobs, your advice was crap. I get emails that say, Dr. Jacobs, your advice was great, but I've never actually done like a scientific poll, representative poll. So, but anyway, lots of things that you can do as you're practicing. And this is kind of the last little bit of what we want to talk about, because it does introduce a bit of complexity. And again, biology is complex. But you want to?
Sure. So we've got 10 minutes left with 9 minutes left with you. So what we wanted to do is kind of give you a tree to plot out. Again, trait and trait loss.
Very important for another bit of jargon. When we say ancestral trait, we're talking about traits that apply to the oldest common ancestor in that tree. So that's an important piece of jargon right there, ancestral trait.
Yeah. So if we stay in this, that the open circle of these was the ancestral trait, we can see here that in this lineage on the right-hand side of the phylogeny, the ancestral trait is maintained. Here, we see that there's that a derived trait has evolved, and the derived trait is then maintained in these subsequent species. And then what do we call that?
Messed up.
Yeah. There's probably some hypotheses in the chat. There aren't yet because you're all eating or drinking. I would love to be drinking coffee.
Yeah.
We talked about as being lost because, and that deeply rooted kind of linear, progressive, mainline understanding of evolution leads us away from thinking about this. But I have to tell you, in thinking about the vastness of the tree of life that includes algae and plants and fungi and protozoans and bacteria and archaea and our multicellular animals, vertebrates, and even the more interesting animals, the invertebrates, this evolution via trait loss happens all the time. And if you think about it from an energetic capacity, it probably makes sense, because energetically it's almost always easier to put something aside and not build it anymore and repurpose that energy if you don't need it. And so very frequently, some frustration with early career biologists is understanding that if we talk about the characteristics of a group, and we have a nice list and people like memorizing lists, as we get to the subcategories of those groups, specific species within a phylo or something like that, we often say, yeah, well, remember those traits, not all of these have them. And it's because they lose them. And we're going to give you some examples about, well, I guess first we're going to ask you.
Right. Please, on our slide. Can you think of some examples?
There's some even already going on.
Traits have been lost. Really good. Any ideas?
I've lost my trait.
Look skyward, moron.
I've found your trait. Your trait is fine.
Tails.
I've found your trait. Your trait is mine.
You can also use a text tool. There we
There we
go. Yeah, common sense. Leah, you're funny. Good sense of smell. Yeah, lactose tolerance. Very good. Lost tail. Yes, exactly. Flight. Very good. Good. Common sense.
Yeah, there's some thoughts about teeth and peas and pinky toes and whales.
Wonderful. Yes. All of those things
Lactose
are
tolerance.
lost traits. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not part of the lineage or not part of the clade, right? It's a lost trait. Traits can be lost. It doesn't rewrite the history books.
Sure. There's somebody's asked in pink there, eyesight. For sure. Lots of cave fauna.
Yeah. Wonderful. Excellent. Yes, to all those things. So those are lost traits. And what we're going to do, finally, bringing it back to the puns that Smith has been talking about, you'll finally get it. They're going to have to rewind the whole time.
Yes.
We're going to talk a little bit. Yes, loss of legs for sure. So we're going to talk a little bit about flightlessness in birds because penguins are awesome. And also ostriches don't fly. Not nearly quite as awesome. But anyway.
Oh, thank God.
Okay, so there are lots and lots of flightless birds, right? All sorts of different places on the planet. And we can take a look at trait loss learn about them, or about trait loss by looking at flightless birds. So they include the kakapo, which is kind of a personal favorite because they're badass. But also flightless ducks, rails, grebes, cormorants, penguins, obviously, and ratites. So those are the ostriches, the emus, the kiwis, etc.
There's a kiwi in the chat. Typing very with great efficiency.
Oh, yay! Hey!
Of the country.
Oh, yay! We actually have a human kiwi in. Welcome. Are you there now? Are you?
Is it tomorrow?
Is it tomorrow?
No, it's
Okay, amazing. So, the question is, though, is flight loss a homologous trait or a homoplasious trait? Has it been lost multiple times? Or the alternative would be that it happened once and that all of these are closely related, right? Or more closely related than they would be to flighted birds. And so you can start to try to figure that out by taking a look at all sorts of things about these different species. So here is a phylogeny. It is resolved, and the question is, if you want to just hold off for a second, let me just kind of walk you through the phylogeny. So we have the common ancestor that does fly. Okay, we know it flies. This is like a thing. So we have the outgroup being chickens.
Delicious.
Which doesn't fly, ish. And they're domesticated, so it's kind of like a whole different thing. But anyway, then we have a whole bunch of flightless birds, you can see, including the baddest ass of all of them, the cassowary. Google it. It is a dinosaur living today.
Terrifying.
It's terrifying. And then within this clade, though, of flightless birds is a group, the tinamous,
the most amazing ones,
which do fly. What? So, tell me, using your stamp, place your stamp where flight would have been lost in order to preserve the flight from the common ancestor to the tinamou. Go ahead. Okay, there's some disagreement, and that's great. It's totally fine. Okay, yeah, good. Super. Okay. So some disagreement, and that's perfect and totally good. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to clear and kind of walk you through it a little bit, because remember, either it was lost, flight was lost once, and if flight was lost once, you would lose it. You could have lost it anywhere here. But then that means that the tinamou had to re-evolve flight. And re-evolving something is really hard. Losing something is much, much easier. Okay, so imagine because flight is complex, and so technically you could re-evolve it, right? But re-evolving it is less likely than losing it multiple times. And this is adding new information to your decision. So let's imagine that it is not possible to re-evolve flight. So it means that you have to preserve flight all the way along, oh, there we go, along here. So you cannot put a stamp on this line. Now tell me where multiple times flight had to be lost. Yeah. Well done. Well done. Thank you for acknowledging the chicken. Good. Yeah, multiple times. Super important. Good. Good. That's great. Okay. So, can fly. And here we go, where the multiple places that it could have been lost in order to be able to maintain the ancestral trait of flight for the tinamou. Okay. There you go. We are a little bit over time.
We just wielded a parsimony.
Yeah.
We just wielded Occam's razor.
Occam's razor at you, but I feel like we can skip to the homework, right?
Well, not even feel. We have to.
We have to. So let's skip to the homework because I think we kind of
skip to the end.
Skip to the end. Okay. I'm going to skip to the end, and you're going to be like, whoa, wait a second. Do we have to know these things? There we go. Okay. There we go. Here's some homework and some things that you can do. So a whole bunch of new vocabulary. Some of you are keeping vocabulary lists. Add these words. But also you can kind of create these categories or these similarities in concepts and things like this. So my brain makes 2 categories that divide up these 6 terms. Your brain may do something differently. That's okay, because going through the process of trying to put these into similar groups will help you learn what they are and how to apply them. Okay. Next here. Oh, look at that phylogeny.
It's beautiful.
Is it? Okay, it's a scary one, it's complex, and we have 5 statements, true or false statements, that you can evaluate against this to kind of practice some of these concepts. So hopefully that will be useful to you. And you can see each statement, we're testing kind of a different part of tree thinking to kind of help you a little bit. And please do enjoy that one to help prep for a topic test coming up. Remember, the more that you're in that sort of applied, uncomfortable space, the better studying you're doing. And I think we will see you on Wednesday.
We will.
And
we must go.
We must go. So thank you all very much.
Because you have places to be.
Yeah.
Most of you have left already.
Take care.
We're going to hang around.
Yeah.
For those who can stay.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. When you hear hoofbeats, don't expect a zebra.
Yeah. Don't expect a diva.
Herds of zebras.